Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. In this one I want to go a little bit more in depth on Azula in the Spirit Temple as well as the Mako One-Shot comic. Yesterday in the video I just talked in general about the news at New York Comic Con. In this case I want to give some speculation. I want to talk more in depth about, now that I've seen people's reaction to it, you know, where people are at with these what seem to be the two 2023 comics that we're going to get. Because if Azula is out in summer 2023 and then we expect the first of the new Korra comics a couple of months after that, it doesn't really leave much room for the second Korra comic to come out in 2023. So straight away we're already talking about sort of second half of 23. So these will be the Dark Horse lineup for the most of next year. I think we'll learn about the others as we go through next year, but in terms of what actually is going to come out, it's going to be these two books. So let's start off with the Mako comic, the Korra comic, because there's not as much to say about that because there's no story details really. So here's what was said. So obviously we have two people live blogging the panel, live tweeting the panel. So too early for new Korra trilogy update, but first story will focus on Mako. So that's what we had during the show. And then the other person who was doing it said there's another trilogy of Korra comics on the way. The first story will be focused on Mako. That's all they can say for now. Now, the key word in both of them is the use of the word first. Both of them say it. That is a very, very weird way to refer to something when what the expectations were from it, the San Diego Comic-Con update, was that, this means a part 1, part 2, part 3 trilogy and not a trilogy of one-shot comics. The first story will focus on Mako is either saying that it is a one-shot comic about Mako and then the other two that make up the trilogy will be about other characters, or that they potentially have multiple trilogies and the first trilogy is about Mako. I think I know which one of those things is much more likely. I don't think they've planned potentially 9 books in advance or something like that. I think they have 3, and I think it is just that they are character one-shots. I think the Korra comics have now switched over to doing the same style as the Avatar comics, which is that we are not getting continuation of the story post-Imbalance, or in Korra's case, post Ruins of the Empire. We are instead focused on one-shot comics for now. And we basically know at this point that the reason that's happened with Avatar comics is because the first Avatar Studios movie is going to be focused on Aang and Ko. And it's going to be focused on in or around this time period. And so what most people assume, and it makes sense to a certain degree, is that they don't want the comics continuing that story, adding content to the era that they are going to be making a big project about. And that's just because of how much longer it is going to take to make the animation, the movie, than it is to do comics. They don't want a situation where they make the movie, but in the meantime, like say 2 comics have come out that actually have information that should be referenced in the comic and you get some continuity error type stuff. Now, they should be able to work around that. They're a big company. They're organizing this, but you get why they sort of want to clear stuff out of the way. I think the same thing is probably happening for Korra. I think one of the movies is probably going to be Korra related, and I think they're just doing the same thing. The next Korra, the Korra content, I assume will be, you know, maybe a little bit of a time skip forward, but still generally talking about the same era. So that out of the way, okay, we seem to know that now. The other information that we had is, if we address what was said at San Diego Comic-Con, they obviously revealed the Azula comic, but then they said, also confirmed, more Legend of Korra comics are on the way, a new trilogy. Creators include Kiku Hughes and Alexandria Monique. So writer Kiku Hughes and artist Alexandria Monique, who was actually at the panel yesterday, will begin in 2023. More details to come. So this is the one, a new trilogy. When you say trilogy, everyone immediately thinks The Promise, The Search, The Rift, Smoke and Shadow, North and South, Imbalance, Turf Wars, and Ruins of the Empire. That style of comic. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. Yes, at one stage they mentioned Qatar and the Pirate Silver, Toph Beifong's Metal Bending Academy, and Suki Alone as being a sort of themed trilogy of one-shots, the Awesome Ladies of Avatar trilogy, but it really, for the most part, isn't called that, because the collected edition of those 3 books is being called like Team Avatar Treasury, and they're doing it in a little bit of a weird way. So it's a trilogy in the sense that it's the same sort of a production format. There's the same amount of pages, same creative team used across all 3 books, but it's very clearly not a Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. So they seem to be, in this case, interpreting this to be now that this is a one-shot trilogy. That's the only way to interpret them saying first story, first story, first story. But it feels weird because of how they did this. The Azula announcement. Azula and the Spirit Temple, a standalone graphic novel by Peter Wortman, Faith Aaron Hicks, and so on. They don't say that this is the start of a Avatar comic trilogy. We assume it is because it's a character one-shot, and we had that before with Katara, Toph, and Suki. So we're assuming there'll be 2 more after this, but they actually haven't said that. So this is why it's so confusing, and why it's difficult to say 100% for sure what the situation is, because the thing that we thought was a proper trilogy seems to actually now be the one-shot trilogy, and then the thing that we actually thought was a one-shot trilogy is actually not confirmed to be a trilogy at all. Now, the way they typically do these is that with these style of books, they tend to do them in groups of 3. So I fully expect Faith Aaron Hicks and Peter Wortman to be the creators on the next Avatar comic, and it to be a character one-shot about, say, Ty Lee, May, Sokka. Those would be the 3 characters I'd be thinking of for like candidates for the next one. We obviously will have to wait and see. So this is why the communication problem is kind of a pretty big deal. They've given us relatively minimal information on these comics, but we still don't know the exact details. So going back to this, you can see the question is asked, what did you basically take from it? They're specifically addressing the new core comic trilogy, so I think it will be 3 one-shot comics. That's the takeaway from it completely. I believe it was also, someone also contacted Dark Horse, and I think they got a response that was basically, we can't say anything. So the request for literally just clarification about what they mean by trilogy, one-shot or proper trilogy, they didn't want to say anything, which I think is a weird situation when you've actually said effectively what it is. Last thing I'll say, and this is sort of a new one, this is Alexandria Monique's ArtStation profile. And you can see here, this wasn't here a bunch of weeks ago, obviously it's a relatively new edition. Experience, what she's working on. Dark Horse Comics interior artist and cover artist on an upcoming trilogy of Legend of Korra comics, 2022 to currently. Now that makes sense, of course, because of course we have over here, Alexandria Monique is working on this. So what this confirms is that this is now a trilogy of one-shots, I guess. This means the creative team is going to be, I guess, the same on all of them. It will be, I guess, Alexandria Monique and Kiku Hughes as the artist and writer pairing for all 3 books. It's just, it seems like at this point we don't know, of course, what the second and third one are actually going to be about. Now, brief speculation. Okay, Mako, and then what are the characters they're going to do? So Mako, I think, makes complete sense. I think anyone saying that Mako doesn't need focus doesn't know what they're talking about. Mako and Asami, I think, of the main cast in Korra, are the 2 characters absolutely most in need of some screen time and some attention. I think for kind of slightly different reasons. Mako has never, I think, been just completely ignored as a character outside of the fact that he is not in Patterns in Time or Beach Wars, so he doesn't actually appear at all in any Korra short story content. So he's been forgotten in that sense, but in general, he is included in everything. And, you know, the aspects of his character are kept somewhat consistent. But you would definitely say he has not been treated particularly well by the writers, whether that be on book 3, book 4, or with the comics. So he needs something in a way to just sort of get him back on track. Finally sort of reverse the favors of this character who has been on a little bit of a downward turn for a bit. With Asami, it's more of the case where I think myself and a lot of other people feel like we don't know the core character of who Asami is as well as we probably should. Given that she is one of the Team Avatar members, given that she's now in the relationship with Korra, the main character, it does feel like we should know her better. And that it is this surprising thing where we don't actually know that. So for slightly different reasons, Mako and Asami, I think, both absolutely need the one-shot completely. As for the third slot, obviously Bolin is going to be a suggestion. And probably is somewhat likely. But I do feel Bolin has actually had quite a bit of focus in, you know, short story content. He's in Beach Wars quite heavily. He is given some level of focus in Turf Wars and Ruins of the Empire. More, it feels like he stands out a little bit more than Mako in those books. And of course, he actually did, I think, relatively consistently have arcs in basically all of the books. You'd actually say book 1 is probably the one where he's probably the least focused on. But since book 1, he actually was there and involved in a little bit of everything. He has a general arc in the comics of like, what exactly is the path that he wants to take, and they seem to be maybe suggesting that he might be like a politician in the making, given his current role working with Zhu Li, and the fact that he actually has a good relationship with like the public and stuff like that, and seems to want to help people. So it seems like that's a general direction that they're heading in with the character. They could do a short story about him. It's just, is it absolutely needed? I'm not sure. So in terms of main characters, that's what makes the most sense. Otherwise, I'd probably say Jinora could definitely do with a comic, or I'd actually say Iroh 2. That allows you to maybe do some Fire Nation stuff, give a little bit more solo focus on the character. That would be nice to see, but who knows what exactly they're going to do. But it's exciting to see how they do Korra one-shot comics. The big thing that they just need to take away is, in my mind, focus more on what, say, Suki alone was doing and less on what Katara and the Pirate Silver was doing. I think they, over the course of that trilogy of one-shots, realized more the way to do things. I think they got better as they went on. I think Katara and the Pirate Silver is clearly the worst and the least important story. Toph, I think, is very middle of the road, where it's kind of like, okay, interesting, but it's not the most memorable. And then Suki alone, I actually thought was very, very memorable and actually quite good. So what can they do for Mako? The one confirmed thing here now. What can the story for Mako be? I think, to me, the thing that stands out the most, the obvious one, is a story with him as a detective just doing his job. I think that opens the door to do a lot of things, whether you want to have it be very solo, have him investigate something, have a fight, solve something on his own. It potentially allows you to have like scenes with, say, like Lin and the other officers at the start. You get to show off that sort of prowess in terms of his intelligence and fighting ability as you go on. And then maybe if it is a little bit more tricky, it would be nice to see sort of like maybe Mako recruit some of the members of Team Avatar to help him on something. Whereas a lot of the times it has been Mako helping Korra, for instance. It would be nice to see maybe the favor get returned there a little bit. That would be nice to see. That's an option. More character focused, maybe some flashback type stuff. I think would be interesting to see him learning lightning from Lightning Bolt's ult. And just anything more to sort of flesh out their kind of past. Republic City Hustle, I think, covers a lot of it, but there's maybe ground to cover very specifically maybe the incident where their parents were killed and how exactly that all played out and so on. That would be sort of interesting. I think the one everyone kind of points to is, what if he basically found a report about the person who killed his Mako and Bolin's parents. What if that was something that happened? That seems like a very cool idea for a story, because you'd have the idea of, can Mako stay cool on the job when that is what's going on here, and it allows the other characters to maybe help him through it, and that's a really interesting way to do the story. You could have maybe like Asami have a little bit of focus. This is where you could actually bring up the idea that Mako and Asami have that same kind of backstory in a way of like Mako and Bolin, both of their parents, but in Asami's case, Yasuko being killed by a firebender and that whole thing. There's obviously with Mako, what if the Fire Nation story? Mako and the Fire Nation is interesting because there's the other side of his family. His mother Naoki is from the Fire Nation, so you can cover that if you want to. But I don't think they'll do the Fire Nation stuff here. I think they'll probably keep that for maybe the animation or whatever. But I think there's a lot you could do with Mako. And I think the main thing I just want from this is just sort of him being written with a little bit of a better level of respect to the character. I think, can we once and for all move on from the Mako awkwardness in relation to Korra and Asami and the Korra-Asami relationship? I think for the most part we were through that, and the little bits and pieces we got in, say, Ruins of the Empire was fine. I think we did resolve that at the end of Turf Wars, but please, we don't need to reference it again. I think Mako is fine with that relationship. Please get back to he is friends with both Korra and Asami, and use that well going forward. I think that's just something that needs to happen, and just get the character back on track. I think the police focus for him has maybe fallen a little bit to the wayside of late, especially in like the later books, because he was mostly focused on guarding Wu and stuff like that. So I think a police focus stuff feels like a very clear thing to do with Mako, but there's definitely potential for sure. Now let's get to talking a little bit more about Azula and the Spirit Temple. So like I said, there's the creative team. Again, there's no direct confirmation that this is the start of an Avatar comic trilogy of one-shots. It probably is, but we don't actually know. We still don't have the like solicitation basically for this book, so we don't have like the official description. All we have is what both people who were live tweeting said about it. So both mentioned that it's about Azula confronting her past. Specifically, this person here mentioned that this was said as well. Will this be Azula's redemption? We'll find out. And then again, Kachi mentioned Azula must confront her past. And then they just showed off two basically preview pages, not fully colored in, but it looks like relatively complete line work. So Peter Wortman has done this. So that's fine. I think it is probably more or less finalized stuff. Given that I think we know from a tweet from Peter Wortman, he only started work on this comic relatively, I think, shortly after the announcement at the panel. This probably has to be from somewhat early on in the book, is my guess. So let's get to sort of talking about this and kind of where we expect to go. So I suppose let's talk about just what we see in the art first, and then we'll address the text. So as you can see here, it is Azula in a tent camping out in a forest of some sort. And then you can see there in the main panel, there is clearly space for two other tents that are now gone or missing in some way. Azula walks out, she looks over at one, sees it's gone, looks over at the other, sees it's also gone. So both are gone, both have like abandoned her, and she gets angry and annoyed. And then she walks over in the other page, finds a mask on a tree branch and picks it up, burns it, and is very, very annoyed about what has happened here. So a lot of questions. What's going on here? When is this set? Is it after Smoke and Shadow? Is it maybe the transition between the Search and Smoke and Shadow? Does this relate to the Fire Warriors, the other Kamurakage from Smoke and Shadow? Or is the mask more about sort of the Ursa connection of the whole theater troupe, Love Amongst the Dragons, that sort of thing? Let's get into it. So on the mask front, because I think this is what most people are talking about, my opinion is, like I say in this tweet, the masks I don't think look particularly similar. So if you look at this picture, you can see a little bit more of a close-up on the mask and stuff like that. And what you can see here very clearly is that it is a half mask. It only seems to come down to about the nose, the one in the new comic. Also, you can clearly see, based on the shape, this is the left eye opening, whereas as you can see, the Kamurakage mask has only an eye opening on the right eye. So straight away, notable difference in two fronts. This is a full mask, this is a half mask, eyes are different, and as you can see here, left eye hole, and then this is what appears to be the right eye hole. So this looks like it has two eye holes, so it's a different mask. Also, strings on the side, and then this one does not have strings, as you can see in this picture, plus also the shape very much comes across as a relatively sort of shallow bowl, versus a clear mask that does have a quite deep sort of like kind of concave aspect to it. So sure, you could say it is just Peter Wortman art versus Team Guri art for the same mask design, but it seems completely different. And I don't think just a different artist would explain getting a very clear silhouette shaped style of mask like the Kamurakage mask so different and wrong. So that's why I lean towards it's maybe a theater mask. Now, on that front, this mask doesn't seem to match up with any of the ones that we see in the Search in relation to Love Amongst the Dragons or anything like that. Now, it might be damaged in some way, who knows? But I think I would lean at this stage more towards it being that it probably does relate more to the Ursa connection, perhaps, just because this is where I think you have to bring in what is said here, which is that it is about Azula confronting her past. And sure, the Fire Warriors are part of that. But I think the mask more referencing Ursa fits that idea a little bit more. Similarly, if we are talking about Azula's redemption, I think part of an Azula redemption is going to have to involve Azula talking to her mother Ursa, and again, the mask thing comes up there on multiple fronts. Obviously, you have the Ursa involved in the theater, and the kids went to see Love Amongst the Dragons and stuff like that, and so they have that connection. It was even addressed in the Search and so on. But you also have from the Search also the Mother of Faces, and the whole idea that Ursa got a different face, and that in a way was like a mask, and that whole idea. And is that part of that past, the kind of, in a way, abandonment of kind of her mother in that sense? Because otherwise, what are they directly talking about? With a lot of other characters, if you say like X character confronts their past, you probably know straight away what you're talking about. One scene, maybe it's one of two scenes. But with Azula, it kind of feels like, what are you talking about here? Obviously, from her more younger past, there is the whole idea of her and her mother. That relationship is, to me, the defining thing from her past that she hasn't dealt with at this point. Otherwise, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about her kind of descent into madness from the end of ATLA, post May and Tylee's betrayal, and how she ends up at the end of that show? Being in the mental institution as we start the Search, she leaves at the end of the Search, sort of finds herself again, kind of regains her clarity, and then Smoke and Shadow happens. Are we referencing the recent comics as being that past? That's what I'm not sure about. I understand why people are talking about the Fire Warriors, because even like, say, the RPG game references that as well. Like if we just go into that, you can see here, this is from the adventure guide. Now, there's a few things here that are kind of weird in the sense that, like, I don't think Azula's current drive is actually to dethrone Zuko, because it directly contradicts what happens in Smoke and Shadow, where she says, I know it's not my destiny for the throne. I know you're meant to be on the throne, but I want you to be a leader in the right way. That's not the same as dethroning Zuko, so that feels like a weird way to sum it up. And again, Azula maintains that her true purpose is to seize the Fire Nation throne, when Smoke and Shadow was like, the big reveal is that no, that's not actually what she wants to do at all. And it's a technicality to try and actually fit that in. If you go to the main book, you have like constant references to the whole idea of like Azula is still at large. She is with the Fire Warriors, of course, into attacking Zuko to make him strong, or so she claims. Despite everything that has happened with Azula, she may very well care for the welfare of her brother, though their relationship remains tenuous. Azula still has the remaining Fire Warriors at her disposal, but she could choose to strike out on her own instead. That's interesting, because the comic seems to suggest that maybe they abandon her, but this is suggesting she goes on her own without them. Chances are she isn't far from Zuko, and she's unlikely to be willingly taken alive. And then I think after that, it's just a reference to the Fire Warriors here, of course, that though many of the Fire Warriors were captured, Azula and a handful managed to get away, with their numbers reduced, and Azula not necessarily standing with the group she founded. The Fire Warriors are wantonly reckless with their plans. So again, they're immediately creating the idea of like, okay, like the end of Smoke and Shadow suggests, Azula continues to be there in or around Zuko, causing chaos, doing what she said she would do in Smoke and Shadow, and then they're teasing a little bit of a fracture between her and the Fire Warriors. I'm not immediately getting the idea that she wants to dethrone Zuko or any obvious change in attitude or approach as such. So, what's the deal there? So there's some interesting stuff when it just comes to that whole idea of the past, and in that sense it could be anything. I find it so interesting that they actually said this at the panel. Will this be Azula's redemption? We'll find out. Like, I find it crazy, the idea that they're teasing even the idea, the suggestion, the tease that this solo Azula one-shot will have her redemption, lead her in that direction. Now, to be fair, if you've read the comics, I think some sort of a redemptive-esque arc does seem to be the path that she is going on. I don't view Azula as being a character who's going to be a villain for the entire rest of her life. There is going to be something in the sense that she has to talk to her mother at some point, and I can't see that going so badly that it just furthers her down the path to becoming a villain. So there has to be that. And I think very clearly they've presented the idea she is not the same as her father. She has aspects of him, but does actually care about other people. Hence, her mental breakdown happened effectively because she couldn't control people. And it's that whole idea of she has this philosophy of controlling people through fear. And I think that is what at its core needs to change. That broke her when it didn't work the first time. She's gone back to it here. And I think what she's probably encountered in the meantime, post Smoke and Shadow, is that her actions are not changing Zuko. Zuko is not so weak anymore in a way that he will crumble under that pressure and become the person she wants him to be. And I think that's why they're getting across this idea that there might be fractures, that she's at her wit's end, is that her plans aren't working. It isn't changing Zuko. And so if that's the case, what actually does need to change? Azula herself. So I think the arc has to be Azula changing in some way. I don't really think we'll get that much significant stuff here, but because I'm expecting the ultimate reveals about where Azula's arc ends up to probably be in the ATLA movie. So this has to just set the stage a little bit for that. Doesn't have to do, I think, in my mind, too much, but just enough to that you go into that comic with an idea of where her character is. Now, does it need to happen very quickly? In my mind, no. I think you can keep Azula as a villain for the next little bit. You can have her be the Kumarikage villain for the next, like, say, year or so of the story. But I do think you do eventually have to have, somewhat soon, not multiple years passing, have her talk to her mother, and I think that will lead to some changes happening. Again, my ultimate idea for the character is not that it is a complete 180 shift and that she is a good character now, she's a member of Team Avatar. No. I think the key characters for Azula to show that she's changed are that, one, she has a better relationship with Zuko, she has a better relationship with her mother, she has, I suppose, maybe some relationship with Norin as like her new father, with Ki as like a new sister character for her, and then like Iroh like potentially doing something to maybe help her would be an interesting thing to do. Beyond that, address the whole friendship thing with Mei and Ty Lee. That's what broke her in the first place. I think there deep down is a actual friendship there, but they now need to see Azula change before they try again with her. And I'd love to see that happen. Maybe Ty Lee is the first one to notice it. Mei, of course, given that she was the first one to sort of actually betray Azula, would, of course, make sense to be the last one to maybe forgive her in all of this. But I think that's the direction that you sort of have to go in. I don't think we're going to be bringing Azula with us in all these Team Avatar missions, because I do feel the ultimate path for Azula to go on is probably to become an advisor to Zuko. So something similar to what she's actually sort of trying to accomplish now with the Kumarikage thing, to morph Zuko into that ruler that she thinks he needs to be, when the reality of it is just that you probably just need the two of them working together on some of the decision making in the Fire Nation, and that's it. That Azula can make it clear that this is a point, Zuko, where you need to be strong. But for that position to work, Azula has to have developed to the point where she, at least to some extent, understands why Zuko is a good leader as the idealistic leader of the Fire Nation, and why that is needed. That yes, she is probably needed in there as a little bit of a counterpoint, but only a little bit of a counterpoint. That the Fire Nation needs that optimistic approach, which I think Izumi in Korra highlights that has continued. They don't want to go back to that way, and I think in general have a more positive kind of approach of leading the Fire Nation. But Zuko, like in the especially in some of the earlier comics, was maybe on the verge of like giving in too much to what other people want. So I think you can see where the balance is actually needed, and especially because like, where does the meeting at the end of Smoke and Shadow take place? In the first Fire Lord's advisor's tomb, which Azula I think points out, like this guy's been forgotten from history. And I think that's the whole idea of like, why does it happen there? Azula highlighting that she effectively has to have this almost forgotten role, but it doesn't have to be forgotten. And if she does a little bit to change, she, I think, could find herself in a good position. That's my take on, I think, where they need to go with Azula. As for her character, I think by the end of her arc, she should still be somewhat manipulative and cruel to a certain degree, but have the capacity to actually be friends with people, be normal around people, understand what like kind of love is, you know, loyalty out of friendship and love. The things that basically her father, Ozai, doesn't have. Just show that Azula does have that within her. And effectively, that's all you need to do, is just literally slightly balance the character from being all that, full Azula, all 100% of the time. You just tune that down a little bit, and then add in this weird, like, unique thing that we've not seen too many times. Really only, you would say, in The Beach, with some of the kind of romance kind of type scenes of Azula trying to like flirt and stuff like that. Bring in some of that, like, oh, we're not used to seeing like Azula maybe like awkward or not confident around people, and just have these like weirdly sincere moments for the character. That would be, in a way, that's almost creepier in a way coming from Azula. And I think that would be a cool dynamic to have for the character, where she can still completely destroy people like verbally if she is set loose on them. But she can also just talk to May and Ty Lee as friends. I think that's what they need to get to. Now, obviously, this seems very far removed from wherever we're going with this comic, because, okay, something happens, she's with people, potentially it's the Fire Warriors, and they leave her. Let's say that's what actually happens here in this. Where do we go from there? What does that mean for her? If the Fire Warriors leave her, that means she is now, I suppose, truly on her own, because she left the potential opportunity to meet her mother at the end of the search. So she left Zuko and everyone like that to do her own thing with the people who she broke out of the mental institution. Now they've left her. She is now truly, in a way, on her own. And she's going to, I guess, feel like everyone has abandoned her and everyone is against her. And it probably would threaten to revert her back to the more crazed Azula we saw in the search at many parts. I don't feel that's probably the direction to go in, but I think you probably have to tease that that is what is happening. She will then, I guess, resort to extremes to accomplish whatever her goal is, to force Zuko to do something. And now that she knows about spirits and stuff like that from the Mother of Faces stuff from the search, she might seek out the Spirit Temple. And that's why we get the whole Azula in the Spirit Temple kind of situation. Here's the proper cover. And again, pointing out some of the details here. Smoke on the bottom seems normal. Smoke on the top seems like it has a kind of face pattern to it, as if it's referencing like the Mother of Faces or the Spirit Wolf that has the whole face patterns that sort of predict when the Mother of Faces is about to show up. What would Azula want to accomplish in a Spirit Temple? Now, there's an interesting part in, I think it's this. It's the Want You Tongue Adventure Guide. If we just go down here. Where is this? It's Where to Find Azula. It mentions this. So this is again very gameplay focused, so it's hard to know where to draw the line of canon with this. But it says here, she might be in the Earth Kingdom, for example, if she's trying to find some ancient scroll that allows her to unlock the power of a dangerous spirit. And then we, a few months after the release of this book, get the announcement of Azula in the Spirit Temple. Is this a direct reference? Who knows? But it's an interesting little kind of tidbit in all of this. So yeah, what is Azula trying to do with spirits? She, as far as we're aware, isn't inherently spiritual. She doesn't seem anti-spiritual, but I doubt she would draw spirits towards her necessarily. Now, maybe this could be a surprise new aspect to her character, where this might be some sort of spiritual awakening type thing, where maybe spirituality does become an aspect of her character to a certain degree. Because again, you do also have the Khmer Kage thing, is a spiritual thing in nature. Now, admittedly, that was just her and the group sort of taking on the look of the Khmer Kage, and not really anything fully spiritual in nature. But one of the unexplained things about the Khmer Kage is, like Azula in Smoke and Shadow, is how they generate the smoke. It is never revealed in that comic, for sure, what the deal is with the smoke. Like, are they just doing like basically firebending to create smoke? Because we know firebenders can technically do that, but we've just never seen it kind of done in that exact way, where it seems to be a very subtle thing that they're just having happen and not like forcibly doing firebending wrong to create smoke. Or is it some sort of an aspect if they have like a smoke spirit type thing actually with them, like a Khmer Kage, because that's what it means, like a smoke shadow. So we'll see what they do. Either way, I am interested in this. The other thing we know about spirits, especially if she has an encounter with a spirit, they can potentially show her things. She could potentially have a vision. And this is the other reason why this could potentially be the gap between Search and Smoke and Shadow. If she has an encounter with a spirit, this might be what sort of changes her view on her destiny. That maybe this is how she was shown a glimpse of the future in some way. And this is sort of fitting because this would be like, say, Iroh, Zuko, and now Azula all having some sense of like what their destiny is. Iroh misinterpreted a dream of some sort. Zuko and the whole sort of like, you know, honor and what his destiny actually is. Is it to capture the Avatar or is it to help the Avatar? And we know how that worked. And so it feels like there's this kind of continuous thing across these characters of initially misinterpreting their destiny, but then getting it right. So Azula has misinterpreted the idea that, oh, I'm not meant to be Fire Lord, but I have to make you into Fire Lord the way I would want to be. Whereas it's actually more like, no, Azula needs to embrace the fact that she is not meant to be like in charge of the Fire Nation in any way, but she can be the advisor. I'm thinking that might be part of the direction that they go in. So I am pretty excited for this book. I think there is a ton of potential here. And especially now that we've had this bit of a story in a way with Faith Erin Hicks. Initially, when she first came on the comics, talking about how she was almost afraid to write Azula as a character. And then gradually being like, actually, I really want to write Azula now. Now, she's getting her chance to write Azula in a comic they are clearly setting up, based on what they say about this. Confront her past. They're mentioning the whole redemption kind of aspect thing here as well. That's fascinating, because that's the discussion. The big discussion everyone gets involved in is, what is the direction for Azula's arc? Should it be redemption? Should it not? I think they've said that for a reason. Now, these sort of early kind of preview things like that could go either way. I would be personally very surprised if we come out of this book knowing anything like hugely significant about, for sure, if Azula is going to be redeemed or not. At least anything all that different from how our opinion is on the character at this point. Which is that I feel she'll ultimately get to that point, because the setup is absolutely there that she has to have a conversation with Ursa at some point. And I don't see how that happens if the idea for the character is just to remain a villain like the entire way through. And the question really is going to be, I suppose, on a bigger picture, is like, what is the plot for the Avatar movie going to be? Because it feels like probably the best thing they could probably do there is have that the enemy in that movie be sort of, this is the last fight against Azula. This is, you know, the last time we see Azula as a villain, and the movie deals with that final step of like Azula finally stepping away from being an antagonist in the series, and we see that happen on screen or something like that. Otherwise, I get the impression we'll just see Azula in that movie and it will already have been resolved. But again, in terms of notable things, which I think Azula's arc is a notable thing at this point, it feels like something that they probably should do on screen rather than necessarily on the page. Even though, at its core, most of it is a comic arc, I think more people would like to see that happen on screen. So the question here is like what sort of a midway point can they get the character to, and when exactly is this set or not? There are things that make me think it might be the transition between the two books, but I maybe wonder, is that what they want to do? If it's post Smoke and Shadow, I think it's actually quite an interesting thing to do, to position where exactly she is. That, oh, she's not with the Kamurakage, the Fire Warriors anymore. She's on her own now, and we don't know what she's going to do next. It would be very interesting if they did set up that, like, hey, she now has control over this crazy spirit or something like that, and she's going to do something with it. And maybe the movie is that plot. That would be very cool if this is kind of like literally a prequel in a way to the movie, but we shall see. So we covered a lot of ground here in this, in terms of both sort of the technicalities of like what these comics actually are, as well as some speculation about what each of them are going to be about. Final point, I suppose, has to probably be about Dark Horse's communication. I find it crazy that they can talk about both of these comics at two separate major Comic Cons, and people come out of it confused, literally about one of the few things you actually had to say. You've created confusion around, and I get it that they maybe feel like, but the words that we use plainly say what it is. But there is this weird confusing aspect of like, well, when you say trilogy, what type of trilogy do you mean, is a somewhat important distinction to make. And especially now that we have these examples of like, well, the ATLA one-shot thing was a trilogy. You're just, at the moment, calling the Azula comic a standalone graphic novel. You are not saying necessarily it's part of a trilogy, though it probably is. But then the Korra comic has always been talked about as a trilogy, but seems to be one-shots. What's going on here? It seems like they're both now the same thing. We have completely moved away from story continuation in the comics. That's Avatar Studios, that's what they're doing with their animation projects. And that the comics now are seemingly only able to do short stories, like short story collections, free comic book day books, and larger short stories, which are these one-shots. Can they do anything more significant? We'll have to wait and see. But they're my thoughts on these two comics and where we're at now after two Comic Cons. Again, I think we will get the description for Azula in the Spirit Temple in the coming weeks. If this is meant to be out in summer 2023, we should be probably getting this book like solicited, I'm assuming before the end of the year. So we'll know a little bit more. Will the description say when it's set? Depends on how it's written. A lot of the times these descriptions, especially for the one-shots, can be very lacking in detail and not really say all that much. But certain details, if they mention the Fire Warriors, then it sort of tells you probably where it's set realistically. It might make it clear, but I'm excited to see that. But yeah, like I said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.